Samuel practices Ortho-Bionomy and is going to tell us more about it this evening and tell us his story. And we welcome him and his teaching to us. And I know from my own personal experience what an amazing healer he is. It's not only Ortho-Bionomy he does, but he is a deeply intuitive, natural healer as well. So welcome and thank you for offering this today.
Thank you. I want to thank HRC and Cornelia. The third Tuesday of every month is my favorite night of the month because the energy here of all of the practitioners working is just beautiful. So I heartily recommend you check it out if you've never been. And I want to thank you all for coming. And before I forget, there's food and drink back there. There are some business cards back there, mine if you want to contact me later. And it's going to be a mix of talking about how Ortho-Bionomy came into being and how it affects me, and also some demonstrations on the table. So we're going to start first with the history of Ortho-Bionomy. And my history of Ortho-Bionomy, which is that I had a very serious accident almost 30 years ago, and I was paralyzed from the neck down, and about, 12, 15 years after that, my symptoms started coming back. I'd recovered, I was a complete quadriplegic, I recovered, my symptoms started coming back, and I was freaking out. I was totally freaking out. So I was trying every possible modality out there, and I went to an acupuncturist in New York, and she said, well, one of the other acupuncturists here does this weird thing called Ortho-Bionomy. And being A, a person who had a serious accident, and B, a hypochondriac, I was absolutely stunned. I had never heard of Ortho-Bionomy. I was like, sure. So this woman came in and said, well, you want to work on, I am progressively more numb as you go down my body. So my feet are really numb. So I said, I want you to work on my feet. So she took my foot and she did these micro, tiny little movements with the small bones in my feet. And my body started singing hallelujah. My body was like, this is the conversation I've been waiting for. My body was electrified. There was more information passing back and forth from my foot than I felt after 15 years of shiatsu and acupuncture, all these different modalities that I tried. So I was amazed and worked with this person for a long time, and then one day I took a class. I have a very strange history because I was a medical intuitive as a child and an energy worker as a child, and I never heard those terms until, 20 years ago. But as a kid, I was this weird kid who told people they had cancer and told people they were having a boy or a girl, made all the babies in the park stop crying, which was always fun. I was like a 5-year-old boy who could make any infant stop crying, an ability I've lost, unfortunately. Because I just became a grandfather, so I'm going out to Seattle. I'm hoping the ability comes back by the time I get out. But I had put all that away. I had locked it all away, and I'd become a computer programmer and systems analyst. So that's what I've been doing for 30 years by the time I was introduced to Ortho-Bionomy. And I took a class, and I fell in love with it. I'm already actually out of my order, which is really hysterical. But eventually, I took the class just out of curiosity, but eventually I realized this was something I was supposed to be doing. And I had always kind of wanted to do service, and I never found, I taught nonviolent civil disobedience and all that kind of stuff, but I never really found a service that really worked for me. So I started doing this for free, and my soul was kind of like, this is what you're supposed to be doing, as well as writing and music and some of the other things. But I never felt sort of this divine affirmation, like, yes, you're supposed to be doing this. And so I was hooked. So I've been doing it since 2009 here in High Falls. When I was paralyzed, I was pretty much treated like a hunk of meat. Doctors came in with classes full of female interns and took all my sheets off and said, here's somebody who's never going to walk again, and they're totally screwed up. And they started even leaving with me still there naked. And I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't move anything but my head. So, I have a lot of experiences like that. So I decided if I was going to do any healing work, my number one goal was to make my clients the senior partners in their healing. So it was to be very respectful and to listen. And Ortho-Bionomy gently respects a client's autonomy. It respects their body where it is. It doesn't demand symmetry. It doesn't try to enforce a model. There's a sweetness to it because it's not agenda driven. So it fit perfectly with my experience having been paralyzed. I needed something that was incredibly respectful. One of the funny things about Ortho-Bionomy is how it has flown under the radar. I'd never heard of it. And this area is full of practitioners of various modalities, amazing modalities. And I'm the only person I know who's doing Ortho-Bionomy, which is kind of crazy. It's a pretty small community, but I couldn't believe I'd never heard of it because it's so powerful. So I hope this is going to pique your interest, and anybody who's interested in a session or who wants to know where to take classes, I can hook you up with people who teach Ortho-Bionomy. Mostly that's down near Manhattan and northern New Jersey, Long Island. But if anyone's interested in studying it, I can hook you up with people who are teaching it. I'm not a teacher. So the history of Ortho-Bionomy. Ortho-Bionomy was founded in the 1970s by Dr. Arthur Lincoln Pauls. And Arthur Lincoln Pauls was really into judo, competitive judo. And he got hurt a lot. And the thing that he found that helped him was osteopathy. He discovered that osteopathy really worked for him, so much so that he became an osteopath. So he had his own practice. And one day he read this paper by a Dr. Jones, a fellow osteopath who'd had a patient who was in incredible pain. And he couldn't help this guy. The guy hadn't slept, he was in misery. Everything he tried didn't work with this guy. So finally, out of frustration, he put him on his table and he moved the guy until the guy felt comfortable. And the guy ended up in a sort of semi-fetal, really contorted, weird position. But he said he felt better. So Jones propped him up with some pillows and left the room to talk to another patient in another room. And when he came back, the guy was sound asleep. And when the guy woke up, he was crying. He was saying, this is the first time I've slept in like 6 weeks. So Jones discovered something really, really powerful. Working with the body's preferred position, putting the body into comfort, will often let the body release. Whenever we're in pain, we tighten up. So he found that moving somebody, even if it was a contorted position, even if it was a weird position, he found that putting somebody into a place of comfort and then holding them there for a period of time, that they would very often release. And I believe his time was usually 90 seconds or more, but we have a practitioner here who knows his work very well, so she can correct me later if she wants. He eventually worked out a system and called it strain counterstrain, which is now sort of branched into strain counterstrain and fascial counterstrain. And Laura Loftus, who is a doctor of physical therapy extraordinaire, does fascial counterstrain. So Jones came up with this thing that no one had ever seen before. And Arthur Lincoln Pauls started playing with it. And he discovered that by adding compression to the area, it's usually a joint. Most of our pain, your neck, your shoulder, comes from a joint. He found that by compressing into that area, or in certain cases actually tensioning, tractioning that area, the releases would come much faster, sometimes 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds. It just sped up the process. So he went and showed this to Jones, it's a little questionable as to whether he met him in person or he sent him a letter, but he communicated with Jones, and Jones said, that's great, but whatever you're doing is not my stuff. It's not strain counterstrain, so can you call it something else? So Arthur Lincoln Paul called it Ortho-Bionomy, which Ortho-Bionomy really means ortho is straight, bio is the body, nomi is the study. So this is sort of it can also be the rules. It's really the rules of of life. It's a pretty grandiose name. And it's a name that nobody understands, which fits him. He was a very interesting guy. Arthur Lincoln Pauls, we call him Al, because his name is just too long, so we call him Al. After he discovered the compression, he then also brought his judo training in. In judo, when somebody's coming at you, you support their motion and follow them through and send them flying. He found, when he's doing ortho-bionomy, that sometimes people would spontaneously start moving, and he could support that motion where the body was going and get, again, even more efficacious releases. So he sort of folded in his judo training to it as well. So, as I said, he was a pretty wild guy. He studied a lot of Indian healing, and this is where ortho-bionomy really shifted away from osteopathy and from strength and counter strength. Arthur Lincoln Pauls believed in chi or prana, whatever you want to call that bioenergetic energy that we have. And he devised ways with ortho-bionomy, both hands-on and hands-off, to work with subtle energy. And osteopathy doesn't really believe in subtle energy. It believes in Western neuroanatomy and physiology, which is great, but ortho-bionomy really went off in another direction, a direction that includes hands-off work and even distance work. He created 4 phases of ortho-bionomy, and being Arthur Lincoln Pauls, the first phase of ortho-bionomy is phase 4, because he wanted to give phases 1 through 3 to people like Jones and the creators of osteopathy to give credit where credit is due. So when we go, the first time I was taking ortho-bionomy class, the root class, there's 2 root basic classes, one of which is extremities and the other is spine and pelvis. I'm starting at phase 4 and I'm like, what is this? But ortho-bionomy is sort of charmingly quirky and idiosyncratic, and that's one of the ways, is your first level of ortho-bionomy, you're at level 4. So he gradually diverged and came up with these phases. So phase 4 is very physical. Somebody comes in, their elbow hurts. I'll find a place that's very tender, and I will move them around until that tender place feels better, which often we call that caving or softening in place. Often you'll move somebody so that any place that's tight will be softer and more open. I also might shift the 2 bones in the arm or twist the bones, anything that softens that place and produces comfort. So it's very improvisational. And at that point, usually I will compress into that joint for 5 or 10 seconds. Everybody releases differently, and one of the ways I was lucky was that I was able to feel energy, and the fact that I'm pretty numb from the shoulders down, the gift I got from that is I can feel energy better, and I can feel physical things less well. It's kind of like the blind person who can hear better. So we track energy. Sometimes when a person releases, their body pushes out. It's called a rebound. I'll be compressing in, I'll be hanging out, and there'll be a rebound that pushes me away that says, I got the message, I'm done, we're all good. Sometimes they'll give a sigh. Sometimes I'll give a sigh. Sometimes shivers will run down my body. There's all kinds of different ways that you can detect a release. And different practitioners somaticize them. A lot of us break out into hot flashes. Some people start coughing, some people start burping. There's all kinds of ways that practitioners release. One of my teachers started coughing in the last 2 years. And it was like, great, we have COVID, and now suddenly when I'm getting a release, I'm coughing like a lunatic. So it's been a little annoying for her. So phase 4 is really very straightforward. There's an issue, you do a straight, simple move in, and you wait for a release. Phase 5 starts like phase 4, but then there is a dance. You might move in, and you're there, and there's a release, but you feel the arm wants to move. You feel the shoulder wants to move. Something wants to happen. And so you support that movement, and you dance with it until the energy that's cycling around comes to a still point. And then you know that the dance is over. So instead of one crisp move, the body may indicate it wants to move in other ways. And phase 5's job is to detect that need and to support it. Phase 5 relies on really sensitive perception of chi or prana Phase 5 is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of the divergence from strain counter strain. So it goes beyond Western neuroanatomy, neurophysiology into the realm of energy work. So phase 4 is related to strain counter strain, really, with the addition that we add compression or traction to speed up the release. Once you go into phase 5, you're really into a different world. And phase 5 is amazing. I'm just going to tell you a few things about it. I had a client, and I was working with her in phase 5 and 6, and I'll explain 6 in a minute. But I was working with her mediastinum, which is sort of the bag that surrounds the heart. And I'm hanging out, and it starts doing a whole complex series of rapidly changing motions. And then it comes to a still point, I'm about to let go, and it does another one, and then it comes to a still point. And each one was different. It did a third one, so 3 times it did this sort of complicated, weird little dance. Now I know that whiplash often jerks your heart around because your heart is basically suspended from a bunch of ligaments. So when you get pulled back like that, your heart can get slammed into the back of the rib cage and you're moving all around. Somebody with whiplash is something like 500 times more likely to have a heart attack in the first year. So I said to her, have you ever had whiplash? She said, yeah. I said, have you had whiplash 3 times? And she said, yeah. Her body was recapitulating. It was figuring out what happened to it on 3 separate incidents. And that just blew my mind. I've also had amazing experiences with people who've had hip replacements, knee replacements. When I was paralyzed, I was actually in a rehab facility with 2 people who just had hip surgery. One guy was like up and walking the next day. The other guy, he just couldn't walk. It was painful, he didn't know what he was doing, he couldn't walk. This is because his body no longer had an accurate picture of the joint, the ligaments and muscles that had been subtly changed while he was under general anesthesia. His body didn't know what had happened to him. So, Ortho-Bionomy in phase 5 and sometimes phase 6, we help with what's called proprioception. Proprioception is the body's knowledge of where all its parts are in space and in time, in other words, in motion. The fact that people can do gymnastics where they're spinning up in the air and doing all this crazy stuff, they couldn't do that if they didn't intimately know where every part of their body was in time and space. Ortho-Bionomy primarily interfaces with this proprioceptive system, and one of Paul's discoveries was that by compression of the joint, you're sending kind of an extra bit of information to the proprioceptive system. You're sort of underlining what's going on, saying, hey, in case you missed it, this is what I'm talking about. And that's why he got fast and efficacious releases. So by helping the body regain an accurate proprioceptive image of itself, the body responds and regains functional movement. Hopefully pain goes away. And I call this often the dance of recapitulation. Often the body is figuring out something that a part of it knows, but its intelligence doesn't quite know. And my job is to mirror what's going on and help it discover what's going on. It can also help things like phantom limb syndrome. Somebody who's lost their leg, their proprioceptive system is still telling them there's a leg there. I had I think she was a colonel, but I don't remember. She was an Air Force lieutenant or something. She'd been a helicopter pilot. She lost her leg. And the missing leg felt like water was dropping on her all the time. It was driving her bonkers. And sometimes it itched. And using phase 5 on the stump of her leg and using phase 6, the energy work, with her proprioceptive system's holographic image of a limb that wasn't there anymore, I was able to educate the system that the limb wasn't there anymore, and the symptoms went away. So it can do some pretty wild stuff. OB is not just for the body. OB is what we call ortho. It's also very useful for trauma. A lot of my work has to do with trauma. So given this miraculous dance at phase 5, you think, well, why do you ever want to do phase 4? Why would you just do this simple directing when you can do this really sexy, amazing, cool thing? And the reason is that sometimes phase 5 is too much information. Sometimes the system can't absorb that complex a task, and it just needs something to say, hey, this joint is contracted. Let's work with that. So we use phase 5 more than any of the other phases, and Arthur Lincoln Paul said you should be doing about 85% of your work in phase 5, which I probably don't. I probably do more like 70. But it's pretty funny because when you first study, you're like, oh, let's do this amazing thing. And then you realize you can get lost in phase 5. You're dancing away, and it's really cool, and nothing's really happening. And then you know you have to get direct because the body has just got too much information. Phase 6 is all the body work, working in the bioenergetic field. Although, and I thought I was unique in this, but I'm not, a lot of ortho-bionomy teachers will touch one point to ground themselves to the person and then work in the field. And I'll explain that in a minute. And then phase 7 is distance work. So with this audience, this might not be too big of a thing, but my father was a science writer. So even though I had all these weird abilities as a child, I locked them away and convinced myself that none of them were true. So I didn't believe in distance work 30 years ago. I thought it was incredibly woo-woo, just totally out there. So for anybody who might have that or knows somebody and you'd like to be able to speak about that, a lot of people in the New Age community talk about quantum physics. Quantum physics is the secret and the this and the that, and a lot of it, frankly, is bogus. But there is something in quantum physics called photon entanglement and quantum non-locality. So this theorized that if you have two photons that are created by splitting apart a photon through a special crystal, so they're entangled with each other on a quantum level, that what you do to one will affect the other, even if they're on opposite ends of the universe. And Einstein was extremely derisive of this theory, and he called it spooky action at a distance, which I really like. But it's now been proven. It has now been proven unequivocally. They have sent photons, they've put them through this crystal, split them apart, sent them down 10s, 20s, 30s, 40 miles away through fiber optic cables. And the minute they do something with one, like change its polarity, the other one changes, like they are still connected, like they're right next to each other. And my theory is that when we do remote work, and there is a lot of new evidence that the brain and the bioenergetic field do function on a quantum level. My theory is that there's a type of entanglement going on. I think it happens also with lovers. I think there are other ways that humans get entangled. But I think when I'm doing remote work, we must be entangled because some of my clients who I've done it a lot with, they can tell me what part of their body I'm working on. They're over in Europe or Japan, and they know exactly where I'm touching. So it may be woo-woo, but this is one of the cases where quantum physics actually backs it up to some extent. So distance is real. You guys are there, I'm here. On another level, it's a weird illusion. On another dimensional level, everything is incredibly intimately connected. And I think that's how all energy work functions. Whether if I'm 6 inches off the body, I might be interacting directly with the field, but I'm interacting directly with it, even if somebody's lying on a table across the country. So I want to talk a little bit more about proprioception. So let's see if I can do this. I couldn't do this for years after I was injured. If you close your eyes and you bring your finger to your nose, right? For years I couldn't do this after my accident. Think about it. Your body knows where every bone, ligament, muscle, tendon, joint is, and it knows where your nose is, and it brings them together. That to me, having been somebody who was paralyzed, I'm actually getting the chills. To me, that is just an absolutely amazing feat. That the body does this and we don't even notice. When we were babies and learning to move, we had to sweat this and practice and learn how to do it. But now it's second nature. But the fact that the body has an intimate knowledge of itself, of every part of itself, through time and space, is what allows us to move effectively. And when I was paralyzed, once I got my strength back, I still couldn't move usefully because I didn't know where anything is. And to this day, if I go to some event and it's like in a field at night, I don't quite know where my feet are. I sort of know, but if I don't have a flashlight, I'm likely to fall down because my proprioception as I go further down is still damaged. And that's probably why when that first woman worked on me, my body was so delighted because it was getting more proprioceptive information than it had gotten in 15 years. And her work did more in 15 minutes than 15 years of shiatsu and acupuncture and everything else. So this is something we take for granted, and yet it's really miraculous. It's an absolute miracle. It allows us to do everything we do. So how does OB work with proprioception, and how would this work be different than, let's say, a massage person? So let's say somebody comes in with a frozen shoulder. A massage person, or some people in more Swedish massage, or even some kinds of physical therapy, they're going to try to massage that and work it and loosen it. What an orthobionomist is going to do is we're going to find the comfortable position. We're going to compress in to tell the nervous system, hey, this joint's contracted. It may be habitually contracted. It may have been contracted for a long time. And it's pretty miraculous because the person suddenly releases. The nervous system gets the message and goes, oh, somehow I got used to a pattern where I realized I was out of alignment. I didn't realize it until you showed it to me. So that's how we work with proprioception. Sometimes that's a simple release. Sometimes there's a cascade of releases. Sometimes in a completely different part of the body. Sometimes I'm working on somebody's shoulder and their lower back releases because everything's connected. Everything is talking. I once had a Qigong master spend 5-10 minutes opening and closing this joint, just compressing it and expanding it. Now, each of these joints is full of basically hydraulic fluid. After doing that for 5 or 10 minutes, every joint in my body was pulsing in rhythm with this guy. That's how you can get releases in totally different places. The nervous system, the joints are all talking to each other. So sometimes it's truly miraculous because, well, not too long ago, I had a woman come in and I was working on her. And she called me and she said, my gallbladder's been bothering me for 20 years and it doesn't bother me anymore. And she said, it happened to you because it literally stopped when you were working on me. So her body figured something else out while I was talking to her shoulder. So before I go any farther, because I'm going to talk about the principles of ortho-bionomy, any questions about the history of it, or did anything I say wasn't clear? Yeah.
When you talk of compression, is it circumference compression or longitudinal compression?
Usually going into a joint, it's longitudinal. However, ortho-bionomy can also work with muscles. Like when I first started, I thought it only worked with joints and not with soft tissue. And I remember my girlfriend would wake up in the middle of the night with these horrible shoulder muscles, and she'd try to stretch herself, and it would get worse. And I would hold her, I'd grab the muscle of her calf, and I'd bring the two halves together to sort of belly out the muscle to help it relax, rather than stretching it and going, oh, you're contracted, let me stretch it. Oh, you're contracted, let me help you there. And boom, then you let go. So sometimes you'll even do a compression where there's a twist. But normally if you're working with a joint, you're finding the angle that's efficacious and then compressing it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right. So we're going to talk about the principles of ortho-bionomy, and there are too many of them. I'm not going to list them all, and some of them come from osteopathy. But the first principle is always move towards comfort, and that was Dr. Jones. That is the organizing principle behind strength, counterstrength, and ortho-bionomy. That's what started it. The next principle is like cures like. So, again, if somebody's contracted, let's say your vertebrae is out. You got a vertebrae that's out. A chiropractor is going to, let's say it's twisted this way. Most chiropractors are going to either crack you or use an actuator or do something to push that vertebra back into alignment. An ortho-bionomist is going to either physically, with a little nudge, or energetically sublux that vertebra out a little bit more, and then the system can self-correct. So it's like homeopathy. You know, we talk about allopathic medicine, which is medicine that just really treats the symptoms. And chiropractic is really very Western and allopathic. The joint's out, you push it back. You sort of exercise dominion over the body. You say, I want you to do this. Ortho-bionomy is much more homeopathic. It says, okay, this is where you're at. I'm just going to do it a little extra so you know where you're at, and I'm going to let you decide what you want to do about it. And 99 times out of 100, the body decides to take care of it in a very efficient, efficacious way. So ortho-bionomy physically or energetically exaggerates the pattern. That lets the proprioceptive system activate the proper muscles, tightening some maybe, relaxing others, to produce a show. Sometimes this is freaking unbelievable. So very early in my practice, I had a massage therapist come in, and she had these ribs that kept pulling out and up out of her sternum. And there's very few things more painful than a rib head that's out. And she had like 3 rib heads out. And she'd been to chiropractors and massage therapists, all kinds of people. So she came to me, she was traveling all the way from Albany. I guess somebody told her about me. And I physically, using phase 4, exaggerated the pattern. I brought the ribs up slightly more, and then I helped them coast back in under the sternum. Great, she felt better. A week later, she was in agony again. It wasn't sticking. So I knew from the work she did that she was very energetically sensitive. And I said, well, maybe this is just too hardcore for her body. Let me do it in phase 6. So I put my finger, 1 or 2 fingers, right on those ribs. And then I went out in her aura. And this is where phase 6 gets not only weird, but annoying. Because you find a place in someone's aura that talks to that spot, that corresponds to it, that vibrates with it. I don't know how to explain it. But sometimes that spot is like over here or over here. Like sometimes it's really annoying and uncomfortable. And sometimes you're lucky and it's right in front of you. I don't remember where it was with her, but I go to that spot, it resonates, I hang out, and suddenly, this is one of the sensations we get when someone releases, I got really hot, and a river of heat came out of her, through my finger, through my arm, and down through the soles of my feet. Just a river of like lava. And then those ribs, on their own, pulled up very slightly, and then dove under that sternum, and they never moved again. I lost her as a client because they never moved again. She was too far away. It was amazing. She and I were both like, what happened? Because it's like wiggling your ears. My father could wiggle his ears. I can't wiggle my ears. The person who is born without hands, who can tie shoes and paint and write perfect script with his feet, we have abilities with muscles and coordination that we don't even know about. And this is one of those cases where her body finally got the depth of her misalignment. You know, I've been sort of chiseling away at it and talking to her, but it got it, and it fired up her intercostal muscles, the ones between your ribs, and her pectoral muscles, and it recapitulated the situation. It probably came from, I think it came from a car injury, and then it resolved. But it had to be pointed out to her in a way that worked. Now, she was very energetically sensitive. If I had been working on somebody who was like me when I first got out of my accident, when I was like, give me all the deep tissue work, you know, beat me up. That person would need phase 4. Phase 6, they wouldn't even register on the nervous system. So that brings us to the next principle of ortho-bionomy, which is meet the client where they are. We don't decide how we're going to educate your body. We start a conversation, find out how it converses, and mold our technique to that conversation. And I'm actually moved when I say that, because I was treated like a piece of meat, and so have been a lot of other people. And to be that respectful of the body. And you're dealing with a body that is out of alignment, that in some way has lost a sense of itself, and yet it has all this wisdom, and it wants to learn. And it wants to converse. My body was dying to converse when that woman picked up my foot. I was just like, hell yeah. So it's very, very touching. And part of that, designing the conversation to where the person is at, brings us to the next principle, which is ortho-bionomy is completely not protocol driven. When I start an ortho-bionomy session, I do 3 moves that I've developed, because I find it down-regulates somebody's sympathetic nervous system, and it chills their vagus nerve out, and it also helps my nervous system get that entrained, entangled connection. So even if I'm working remotely, I'm doing these 3 things, which involve the sacrum, the tailbone, and the pubic bone, and the back of the head. But no other ortho-bionomist does that, you know? And that would be the extent of my protocol. At that point, somebody may come in for a tune-up. They're like, well, I just want to see, you know, what you see. Or they may come in and say, my liver is killing me. Or they may come in and say, my neck is killing me. Or I broke my ankle 3 years ago and it just hasn't healed right, or whatever. And then the conversation will get specific. And again, they might tell me which way their ankle broke, and I'm going to, either by talking to them or energetically, I'm going to say, well, does that feel better or worse? Like, I might think that ankle should go this way, and they're like, no, it feels better that way. I'm going to go that way. The customer's always right with Ortho-Bionomy. I'm not going to project my idea of what their body should be doing or how it should be evolving. I'm going to listen. We listen more than we talk in Ortho-Bionomy, actually. So we have moves. We have classes where there's all kinds of specific moves. You want to release the L5 sacrum junction. You want to release a bone in the cranium. We have all these places that we monitor and these moves that we do that have been systematized and discovered by people. But we don't do them in a sequence. We don't go, let's do A, B, C, and D. And indeed, we often improvise. I'm an improvisational musician, so improvising is like, that's another reason I love Ortho-Bionomy. Something's not working. I'm supposed to release this shoulder point this way and it's not working. I will try something else. There's no rule that if you don't do it that way, the OB police are going to come and get you. There's a system and it's based on these principles. Following the pattern, like cures like. But within that system, there's a huge amount of leeway. Our clients' bodies are not viewed as a machine to be offered mechanical correction. I view my clients, and I think Ortho-Bionomy does, view their bodies, their beings, as a living, adaptable, responsive, conversant system. One that is always hungry to be heard, and is actually also hungry to learn and change and evolve. But most of all, it is dying to be heard. We cover our bodies in clothes, we wear shoes, we numb out our nervous systems. And that's why so much healing touch in so many modalities can be so touching to people. Because we encase ourselves, we separate our nervous system from other humans. And Ortho-Bionomy is incredibly intimate. It's not sexual, it's not sensual, but it's really intimate. We work with our clients, not on them. And indeed, the clients I have where we get the best results are the clients who work with me. They're paying attention. They're not zoning out going, fix me. Just fix me. They're thoroughly involved. And when I have a client on the table, I say, there's 3 things you can do to help me. If you feel a physical sensation that you think is related to what I'm working on, even if it's in a different part of your body, if it feels germane, tell me. If an emotion comes up, tell me. Although I'm kind of like a bloodhound, and I often feel the emotion before they do. I've been known to cry in the middle of a session. And if a memory comes up that feels germane, tell me. So I'm asking my clients to monitor their own energy to their best ability, monitor their body to their best ability. And those are the people who get the most benefit. So our goal is to increase function and decrease or eliminate pain through stimulating the body's own process of gaining awareness and then supporting it in the changes it wants to make once it has attained that awareness. This isn't really a principle of Ortho-Bionomy, but it's a byproduct. It plays well with others. Because it's improvisational, because it's not protocol driven. I know so many physical therapists, acupuncturists, coaches, massage therapists who have folded Ortho-Bionomy into their practice. And a lot of massage therapists have moved to Ortho-Bionomy either partially or completely, because after 20 years of beating up their hands and their arms, they're like, oh, I can do that with almost no effort. Because the hallmark of Ortho-Bionomy really is that it's gentle and it's soft. It's not a crack you, push you kind of thing. And I'm probably on the gentle end of Ortho-Bionomy, but it is already a very gentle modality. So we have all these different people who use Ortho-Bionomy, and I don't just do Ortho-Bionomy, I blend it with the other things I do. The range of flavors of ortho-bionomists. There are ortho-bionomists who are almost like chiropractors. They're doing the opposite maybe, but they're extremely structural. They're anatomy freaks. There are ortho-bionomists who almost completely work with things like emotional trauma. It's a big, big tent because it can work with so many parts of the nervous system, including really just somaticized emotional trauma. People have probably heard of the book The Body Keeps the Score, or Philip Levine's work, Waking the Tiger. The body does keep the score. It somaticizes trauma. And and you would be working. I remember when I first started studying Qigong, which was before I was paralyzed, and I was in standing meditation for hours. And it's a very specific clearing down meditation. But you're just standing in a posture, you're not doing anything. You're just trying to release any place where you feel tension, or strength, or tingling, or numbness. And all these emotions would come up. Anxiety, grief, rage. I'm just standing in a posture. But that was all somaticized emotion. That clearing down work was liberating. And almost any healing modality worth its salt can address that as well. The last principle of Ortho-Bionomy that I'm going to discuss is my favorite, which is less is more. And there's literally a bumper sticker that says, Ortho-Bionomists do nothing better. It is true. I recently worked on a client of mine, Holly. She's in a lot of pain. And she gets up off the table and she said, for the last half hour, I just wanted to tell you to do something. Just do something. But then I got up and there's no pain. And she's just like, she sort of wanted to push at me. She was annoyed. She's like, oh, I guess you did do something. But it can be like that. It can be so gentle and the results can be so profound. It's counterintuitive. We're used to thinking sort of no pain, no gain, dig into that tissue, crack that spine. And this is going, no, if I show your nervous system where it's at, it will flower. It will open, and it will be gentle. So, Ortho-Bionomy rarely induces re-traumatization. It even rarely introduces healing crises. The worst healing crisis you usually get with Ortho-Bionomy is you can be really tired after a session because your nervous system has been in a conversation that is there's way more bandwidth than it's used to. It might be used to that, the part of your frontal cortex is used to that, looking at the internet and newspapers and all the stimuli, but your sensory nervous system has suddenly gotten this huge amount of information, and it can tire you out. I always have my clients really take it easy for the rest of the day if possible. As a guy who was as emotionally and physically numb as I was after my accident, and angry and scared, and I only wanted deep tissue work. You've got to rip me open because I've been through all this stuff and I can't, and I'm numb. I'm partly numb, mostly numb from my shoulders down. So I want to feel. For me to discover that the opposite was true, to discover that my body was more willing and able to evolve through gentle work and evoke its own change with more efficacy from that work. Blew my mind, opened my heart, changed my life. It really changed my life. So I'm going to try to define Ortho-Bionomy for you, and it's a little hard, but we're going to try. As I say, it's about following the pattern and reading the client, and less is more. But what is it really? It is a multifaceted dialogue between the practitioner and the client. Some of that dialogue is verbal. Does this feel better? Does this feel worse? Does the pain get better? Is it the same? A lot of it is through our connected nervous systems. We are constantly asking questions with our hands, like that woman holding my foot. She was moving these bones and going, does that bone want to go this way? Does it want to go that way? Is it locked? Maybe it has a twist. Maybe it wants to twist. And that woke my entire nervous system like a Christmas tree. So we are asking these questions, but we spend most of our time listening. I'm holding somebody and I'm doing something and I'm just intently listening. I'm listening for muscular changes. I'm maybe listening to see is there a preference. Does that ankle want to twist this way or that way? Is it locked that way? Well, then we're going to go the other way. But I'm also listening to energy. I'm feeling energy open up. I'm feeling it start to flow where it was constricted. And then we ask some more questions, and then we listen some more. And once in a while, we make a suggestion. I go, okay, well, you seem to want to twist this way. Why don't I underscore that by saying, let's compress that and see if you can really understand how twisted you are. So we're constantly following all these patterns, and the client's nervous system is following them and taking in all this information. The nervous system learns the places where the body is contracted, constricted, maybe numb. I think the nervous system can become disassociated just as we can become psychologically disassociated. I often find that when somebody's injured, let's say somebody's hand was crushed, it's 10 years later, their hand is healed and they can use it, but their chi is not going out to their fingertips. The whole body has pulled back. And they're half disassociated. The body went, oh, that really hurt. I'm going to just pull myself back. And I sometimes, when I'm fortunate, I can help that energy completely come back in and flower. So, in its simplest distillation, Ortho-Bionomy is a mirror, or maybe it's a searchlight and a mirror combined. But this is my pocket definition. It's different from the one that the Society for Ortho-Bionomy uses. I like mine more. Ortho-Bionomy is physical and energetic modeling of the body of its own misalignments and constrictions so that it may self-correct. And that's why in my practice, and I think in Ortho-Bionomy in general, the client is the senior partner, because we're not making the body do anything. We're listening, asking questions, making suggestions, and letting it evolve. So you put me on a table, my legs are never going to be even. My body's just been through too much. Every chiropractor wants me to be even. They just want me to be even, be symmetrical. I'm not going to be symmetrical. That's not who I am anymore. Not after what's happened to me. An orthobiologist is, they may look at that and go, oh, you're out, you might have, your psoas muscle might be contracted, let's release that and see what happens. But they're not going to yank me around until I'm symmetrical, which doesn't work anyway. 10 minutes later, out of the office, they're not symmetrical. Any questions before I go to the last section before we do a demo?
Can you work on yourself?
It's a great question. You can. In fact, there are 2 books here. This is Ortho-Bionomy, A Path to Self-Care by Luann Overmeyer, who's a great teacher. I've taken classes with her. She had a huge accident which brought her to Ortho-Bionomy. And there's a lot of things you can do to treat yourself. Again, once you know the principles, okay, this joint is hurting me. Well, does it hurt more? That feels better. That feels even better. Let me just hold it there. Oh, it doesn't really like being compressed. Well, maybe I'll hold it out. Well, that feels better. So you learn the principles and you can apply them. However, I don't know if this is just true of practitioners in general. Most healers I know of any modality have a hard time working on themselves. I can do certain things for myself, but if I do cranial work on myself, I will do the exact opposite of what I should be doing. Invariably, I will mess my skull up. I don't know why that is. It's like the wires get crossed. But this is a great book. Anybody wants to look at it later on or take a picture of it so you can look it up. And another great book, Ortho-Bionomy, A Practical Manual. This is a step-by-step how-to book for practitioners. So this helps you if you're studying. How do we work with the ribs in general? How do we work with the cranium in general? How do we work with the sacrum? You don't have to be a practitioner to buy this. I think anybody who's interested in anatomy and ortho-bionomy can certainly read it and enjoy it. But the other one is more oriented around self-care.
I have a question for you. My granddaughter, who is a freshman now in high school, she got Lyme disease that was undiagnosed. They thought she had this or she had that, but it caused her, culminated in Bell's palsy.
Mm-hmm.
Will something like this help that?
It can.
Okay.
I
mean, she's made great progress.
Right.
And so, but she's just not the same.
Yeah, it absolutely can. Neurological things are kind of the hardest thing to treat, even though Ortho-Bionomy works with the nervous system, because the nervous system is slower to repair itself than muscles and such. But yeah, it can. I mean, it can cure paralysis. I mean, it can, it really depends on the person. But yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if she lives around here or somewhere else, but if she lives somewhere else.
She was close enough.
Okay.
With
I mean, you can always Google the Society for Ortho-Bionomy International and find a practitioner near where you live. Anything else before I go a little bit farther, and then we'll do some work on the table.
I'm just curious, so your paralysis was healed just the modality that?
No, I did a bunch of stuff, but I was, like I said, this crazy, weird energy healer when I was a kid. So when I was paralyzed, totally paralyzed, I was in just insane amounts of pain. and there's no drug that can work with spinal cord pain. There may be now, but there wasn't then. All the painkillers we know about mediate between the peripheral nervous system and the central nervous system, and your spinal cord is the central nervous system. So I was being electrocuted 24 hours a day, and all I did was try to feel where my spinal cord was crushed and try to get energy moving through it. That's all I did every waking moment. And I also had other people come and work on me energetically, but I honestly believe that's what did most of the work, because my back was to the wall. I mean, there was a point where I actually begged to be killed, I begged to die. But instead, I just started working on sort of repairing as much as I could repair. And there's this ridiculous scene in the movie Kill Bill where she tries to like move one of her toes, and she moves one, and she's like, okay, let's get all the others moving. And in no time, she's like, fine. In reality, it took me weeks to move one finger. I had to put my arm up on the thing and I would look at it. And when I moved it, it took, another few days for the next finger. It took a long time. It took me 9 years to play guitar again. And even then, I couldn't feel the strings. I had to watch for another 5 years before I could play without having to look at what string I was on. So in my case, I brought every weapon to bear, every energy worker, every supplement, and my own knowing that I was born with. So, as I said, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, actually I've already talked about that, never mind. I went out of order because I'm an endurizer. So I did say that after I worked, this woman worked with my foot, I eventually took a class, and I was hooked from the first class. So why was I really hooked? Ortho-Bionomy speaks to the science geek in me, and because it's all connected. You have to take a college level anatomy and physiology course to become a full practitioner. It's all connected to Western neuroanatomy and neurophysiology. But it also speaks to and acknowledges the truth of the energy work that I was born knowing how to do. It works with both sides of my brain, it works with my belief system. And in its physicality, in the straightforward movements of phase 4, and then the more energetic dances of the higher phases, I think it also marries the divine masculine and the divine feminine. And I love that. I don't even know any other modality that does that, but I think we all carry both inside us. And it marries them together, weaves them together in a beautiful way. I don't know if anybody else ever did photography, but I had a darkroom at home, and I used to print photos, and every time the photo image came up, after 10 years of working in a Sarah Lawrence darkroom, helping run it, every time it came up, it was still like, oh my God, that's amazing. I never got tired of it. And I have that experience with Ortho-Bionomy all the time, as a client on the table, as a practitioner. These small and sometimes large miracles happen that just defy belief. And that's what hooked me also, because I experienced that in the classes. It feels very profound to experience on the table. It feels very profound to engage in conversation with a practitioner. It is definitely a path with a heart as well as with a brain. It's very intellectual and very intuitive. And I think that is its greatest strength, and the fact that it's not protocol driven, that you can respond. The person's body can respond and you respond to them. Anybody have any other questions before we do some stuff on the table? Everybody good? Anybody wants to look at these later? Let me know. And would you all be okay if I just took a picture of you? I'd love to have a picture of you. Is that okay? Okay. From my scrapbook. Actually, let me just do this. I don't know how many of you there are, but there was more than I expected, so I'm happy about that. Alrighty, so who would like to experience this? Come on up. Hey there. Yes, I have. This is probably not the right therapy session. I need to do some very short, sweet, simple demos. Not right now. No, I need something else. No, it's probably the cranium, but it's too complex for her. Anybody else? So, what's your name?
Very,
Terry.
very much.
All right. What's going on?
I'm like just really tight all over here.
Okay.
Sounds like something when you talk about release. I'm like,
Yeah.
ooh.
We'll give it a shot. You can lie down on a table on your back. Yeah. Again, normally I would do my little procedure, but a perfect stranger doesn't really want me touching their pubic bone and tailbone in front of the room full of people, so we're not going to do that. Well, I'm going to check one thing first. We have, oh, that's good. We have a muscle in our body called the psoas muscle. It is the sort of let me run as fast as I can muscle. And our limbic system doesn't really know the difference between a saber-tooth tiger and an idiot in a traffic jam honking at you. So we mostly walk around with our psoas is messed up. And it's usually the first thing I check, because if your body is exhibiting a fight or flight response, it can tell your brain that, the way your brain can tell your body that, and you get in a feedback loop. But her psoas are great. There you go. You did my work. So I'm going to do a few things. I'm going to feel her neck, which is pretty tight. And I'm going to try and mostly demo like phase 4, phase 5 stuff, because if I'm doing phase 6, you're going to be sitting there going, okay, well that's great, nothing's happening at all, versus, okay, something subtle is happening. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do some general releases, and I'm going to ask her some basic questions. So here's one of the questions. I'm going to do 2 moves, an A and a B. I'm going to ask you which feels better. Okay? So this is A, and this is B. B feels better. So that is her preferred pattern. So I'm now going to very gently compress down her spinal column. So all the joints in her neck go, oh, we're contracted in a way that back. And she's already starting to release. And it's hard to explain, but there's an energetic flow, there's a slight pushback. And we're going to do the same thing with another move. We're going to turn your head sideways. So which feels better? A, and try to balance when you do it, or B. Now I would have thought A, because A appeared to move more easily for me, but she's the boss. Her body says it's B, it's B. Feel what do you think?
I'm really in pain, but like, it's just like a fight.
Okay. I'm going to do one more. We're going to do the ear toward the shoulder. So this is A, and this is B. Okay. Now, one of the issues when somebody's got a pain like this, it can start in many places. One of the things I'm going to check is her first rib. First rib is way up and it's powerful. You can't adjust it directly. You actually have to kind of work with the second and third rib. But when that rib is raised, it hits something called the brachial plexus, and it can cause pain down the arm, it can cause pain down the neck. Half the time when you treat somebody with carpal tunnel, you work on raised ribs over and over again, and carpal tunnel starts to chill out. So we're going to just check. So first of all, are either of these painful?
Yeah.
Either of these painful? Okay. So you might not have a raised rib. Here, this one.
Yeah.
All right, so this is a classic shoulder release point, actually. So we're gonna try to release that. So what I'm really doing is I'm trying to find that place where that softens, where that spot feels softer and more relaxed. So if I go this way, it's actually tightening up. If I go this way, that, and then I'm gonna use stomach to compress her hand while I'm monitoring this spot. Now, I'm monitoring this spot with my thumb, which is technically not what you're supposed to do, but I use all my fingers. And what's happening is that spot is starting to pulse. There's a communication going on. It's starting to pulse. And this is one of the ways to catch and release. And there's almost a like slight electric current in my hand. And then I'm just going to do a little re-education of it. Does that feel good or bad? That's good. So I'm compressing her humerus. I'm actually also compressing her collarbone and her shoulder blade because they're all contracted.
And I have to go up and then where the original.
That's right. A lot of the stuff comes from there.
Yeah.
And another thing we will do after a release like that is we might do something like this, what we call integration. So the body feels the joints moving and goes, oh, something's changed. We get it. When I first started, I was so interested in doing 3,000 moves that I didn't do integration, and I was really, I was rushing with people's nervous systems. Sometimes you have to just sit for a minute. You gotta give it time. So another area that's hard to figure out sometimes is the problem in the shoulder, is the problem in the neck, is the problem in the skull, is the problem right where the neck and the skull join, which is a very popular place with nerves. So I'm going to do a tiny bit of cranial work on her left occiput. So what I'm doing is I started moving her occiput in the direction I think I want to go, mostly energetically, slightly physically. And it's sliding down. And now it's starting to almost circle. Oops. Now just change direction. Now if I was just doing phase 4 and sticking with it, I wouldn't let it change direction. The other stuff I was doing was phase 4. But this one, I think the dance is important to it. So I let it do its thing. All right. The last thing I'm going to do is right at the top, right at the first vertebra. We're going to see if we can move that into comfort. So, question for you. Does this feel better or does this feel better? You're about the same. Okay, so I'm going to take a guess then. It definitely wants to move this way more, so we're going to use that as a reference. I still think your first rib may be out, but Rome was not built in a day. So, interestingly enough, her neck is way looser. I mean, way looser. It was kind of like an iron bar. The only thing I'm really going to do now, I call this sort of phase 5.5. So what I'm doing is my hands are there, and I get a lot of work done this way. It's amazing. I'm just putting energy into her spinal column so her vertebra can feel where they are, and they are very, very slightly shifting. In fact, some of them are coming anterior, they're coming forward. So what's happening right now is her neck is actually bringing back a little of its normal curve. And now it's settling in. Okay, we have 4 curves in our spine. We have a curve like this in our neck, and then our thoracics back here curve this way, and then our lumbars curve this way, and then our tailbone curves that way. And her neck had flattened out some of its curve. And just now when I talked to her vertebra, her vertebra literally moved forward to get more curve. So I want you to get up gently and see how you feel. And if there's no difference, that's cool. I really want you to tell all of us, is there a difference? Is there not?
Yeah, there is a difference. That was very tight, but my range of motion is better now.
Cool.
That's really awesome.
You can see how simple. All right, she's ready. Sure. We'll probably do you and then probably all the next. What's fine. Okay, we're good. All right. Sure. already's there. That's interesting. Okay, we're not gonna do all this. but
No,
we'll
I
see.
know, I'm just telling you, you decide.
Yeah, okay. Am I down with that? Again, I'm going to check her psoriasis first. I have an ulterior motive. The ulterior motive is that if you've ever been to a chiropractor with a contracted psoriasis, the way they release it is usually insanely painful. You're lying down, they bend your knee up, they stick their elbow into that muscle, and then they make you straighten your leg over and over again, and it's excruciating. And when you see how Ortho-Bionomy releases it from psoriasis, you're like, oh my God. So let's just see. No customers here. That one's a little. Now, in Ortho-Bionomy, you can check the length. And yes, if the leg is shorter, maybe the psoas is contracted. You can have somebody put their arms up with their hands back here, and if their fingers are offset, it may be. But the truth is, most of the time, I just feel it. And this rotates with much more difficulty than this. Probably this leg is doing more work in some way. Maybe there's a little injury, maybe there's an asymmetry in your hips. But I'm going to release this psoas. So, I don't want you to help me, but this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to bend your shoulder towards your hip. Okay? I don't want you to do it. I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to bring this leg out and compress it into your hip. And then I'm going to reverse the process. Okay? So what I'm doing, and interestingly enough, by the way, her body right now is already like this, which is really evidence that the psoas is engaged. Her body's already being contracted in that direction. So I'm exaggerating the pattern. I'm going, okay, you like this? We're going to do that more. What I'm doing is releasing the belly of the muscle, giving more slack in this huge muscle. It's one of the biggest muscles in the body. It's super powerful. It actually can break your leg. So I'm actually softening up that muscle. And then I'm going to shorten the distance more by compressing her leg into her hip. Now, if anything doesn't feel good, let me know. Usually this feels really good. How is that? Okay. You have to do a lot of compression of the hip because the hip is used to carrying a lot of weight. It's not like working with somebody's finger. It's already releasing them. But I am going to give it a little extra work. So what I'm doing now, that was phase 4, very straightforward. Now I am barely compressing it, but I'm moving the energy, I'm compressing it much more. Because sometimes the two work really well together. So it is going in and in and in and in, and it just started kicking back. So I actually got much more, it's all floppy now. I got much more energetic distance traversed than I did physically. The first compression got me started, but when I went into phase 5, I was actually able to get over. So now, oh yeah, it's a totally different play. So again, that muscle can be telling her subconscious you're in danger. That muscle can be in a flight status, and it's telling her limbic system, her sympathetic nervous system, you're not safe. It's a feedback. One can tell the other, either direction. All right, let's see what else we've got. And believe it or not, that's a huge effect up here. So believe it or not, your neck is not nearly as tight. Your skull shapes is pretty neat. So I know this is pretty boring, but all I'm really doing is sitting with her skull and waiting for her skull and her neck to feel me. Because this neck wants to close. This neck has been through a lot and it wants really gentle. Again, needing to find where they are. But we're going to try a little range of motion, okay? So try not to help me. So this is A, and this is B. Which feels better? Do it again. A or B? A. So one of the things that's interesting about you is you have a lot of pain, but you also, your neck's pretty loose and you have pretty good range of motion. Which makes me think that some of this may be trauma from somewhere else. Here we go. So now it's releasing. Sometimes in an ortho-bionomy class, everyone in the class will come out with a hot flash. It's like everyone's got a pulse on something that's big release. It's really fun, especially after like days of releases. So what's really interesting about you is your body isn't acting like it hurts. I know it does hurt, but that to me means that this would be a session where we go into trauma in other parts of your body, into emotional trauma. I don't really distinguish between emotional trauma and physical trauma because the body stores emotional trauma, internally anyway. So I might be able to make a small difference. I do want to check this shit, but your case is interesting because your system is not acting like you're in pain. It's almost like your muscles are disassociated from your pain system. Does that feel good or bad? So all I'm doing right now is, I'm compressing the joint slightly, but I'm actually mostly working with the soft tissue. I'm working with this muscle. Because this muscle is tight. Not the neck. This muscle is tight. Good. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave it at that because you're definitely a complicated case. Let me know how you feel when you get up, if it's any different. And if it's not, that's totally cool. I prefer authenticity to compliments. Lighter. Good. Sure. Your case is real interesting.
Can you be good at ortho-bionomy if you don't have that intuitive piece?
That is a really good question, and it ties into another. When I took my first class, a lot of people thought I'd been doing it for years because I'm so energetically sensitive. And I had taken classes with people who they can't track energy. I mean, I had this experience with one teacher where we were working on the internal organs. And she would say, oh, I don't know, this valve is twisted. And I would know exactly the direction. Like I was right there with her. I could feel every single thing that she was feeling. And a lot of people in the class couldn't and were extremely frustrated. It's like athletics, right? I'm never going to be Tiger Woods. I was born with an ability that gives me an advantage. But I have known people now in Ortho-Bionomy for, 12, 15 years, who have developed more and more ability. And the other thing is their hearts have opened. And that has made them better practitioners. That's what really happened to me. I mean, I've always been an empath, but this work really opened my heart. So I have a kind of philosophy of fake it till you make it. I've seen too many people who just couldn't feel energy, and the teacher's like, just pretend you feel it. And lo and behold, it's sort of like writer's block. My parents are both writers, I'm a writer. If I can't write, I will write gibberish for 2 weeks. I'll just write garbage as fast as I can to prime the pump, and then suddenly real writing appears. It's like that. If the person is concentrating on tracking that energy, eventually their nervous system will develop that. It's like developing a muscle. So it will become more sensitive. And certainly, you do better work when you're in a good place psychologically. There's one thing we do in Ortho-Bionomy that's really interesting called the happy bath. So you're working with a client and something's not shifting. They're stuck. Something's not happening. You think of something that just fills you with joy. You don't tell them about it. I have a picture of my daughter when she was like 6 with a butterfly net, and she's just grinning like an idiot. She's like, ah! And that just makes me incredibly happy. So I have that nearby. If somebody is stuck, I'll look at that picture or I'll look at it in my mind. And your field affects their field. You can't do this work if you're uncomfortable. If I'm leaning way over and my back is screaming, if I have to pee, whatever, or my client has to pee, like we gotta stop and take care of that. We both have to be comfortable because our nervous systems have to be in a place where they can converse. So yeah, it's, I think it's a discipline that really encourages humanity in a weird way because it doesn't work unless you're being a human. Shall we want to do something quick and then we'll call it a night? Really glad I got to release your sides. That might really actually affect a lot of stuff.
I have a lot of permission.
Oh, plantar fasciitis. Okay, cool. Can you take your shoe off? So plantar fasciitis is the tendon along the sole of the foot ruptures. You sleep, your feet get bent down over the blankets, the arch gets exaggerated, you get up in the morning to stand, and that compresses, the arch opens up, the tendon isn't ready, and you get these little sort of micro fractures. So do you sleep with braces on it? Okay, so one thing you can do, there on Amazon, is you can get there are these big fancy boots, but you don't need there are these little splints. And you put the splint on so that when you're under the blankets, it doesn't let your foot fold up.
You want me to sit down?
Line it, yeah. And move, actually, if you can move a little closer to me. So what I'm doing right now is feeling around for any place that's tight. Now, given her situation, I might do a session where I worked on every single bone in her foot if I had the time, but I don't. So what I'm going to try, I'm going to ask you which feels better. I'm pretty sure which it is. Does this feel better or does this feel better?
The first one.
The first one, I was wrong. So, really odd to me that this tendon that has obviously been through stuff actually wants to be stretched. Now I'm compressing her entire foot, her whole foot is starting to pulse, especially her heel. Some bones are moving. And I'm just going to sort of hang out until I'm not going to go into phase 5. I could. Her foot wants to dance around. This is where, the art and the science get mixed. Her foot wants to dance, and I'm really good at the phase 5 dance, and my system is saying, no, her foot needs some clarity, so I'm not letting it go sideways. But in a minute, I might take one of the other moves from that dance and do it as a separate, discrete move. But again, plantar fasciitis is something that takes a while. And you should definitely look into these splints because they can change your life. Because it stops you from re-injuring. If any of you ever have, real pain in the arch of your foot, there's a good chance it's plantar fasciitis. So right now, I do my best work when I'm not thinking. So I'm talking to you, and this tendon starts moving out medially toward her side, and now it's coming back. So I think this tendon is recapitulating an injury. It may not have even been an injury where you get up and your foot's short. It may have been a different injury where she twisted her ankle, but something toward this. Okay. So again, this is one of those things that will take a long time. All right, I'm going to just do one other thing. One of my favorite things, actually. It's called linking up the training. So a lot of injuries in the foot will screw up your gait. They'll screw up the way you walk. They will make your hips uneven, which her hips are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get her ankle and her knee and her hip all in the same place, all talking to each other, because they're not. Her ankle is almost rigid. So I am compressing right now into her ankle. In a minute, starting now, I'm going to move that up to her knee. And now it's coming back, which is great. And now I want to try to get to the hip. So what I'm actually doing is I'm changing the angle of force very slightly. I'll show you in a minute with my hands. I'll be done in just a second. Just a second. Okay, there we go. So we've got two bones here, we've got another big bone up here. The relationship between the ankle and the knee, these bones may be sheared, one may be closer than the other, they may be trying to go sideways. So my first job is to get this system in line with the knee so that the energy is going straight to where the knee is designed to carry the foot. So that may be at this angle. Then once the energy gets to the knee, then I have to sort of rudder it around very gently and find out how to get to the hip. And in her case, it was sort of like this and then like that. So what I did was create coherence in this whole system. And I want you to get up and put your shoes on and tell me how you feel, and I want you to walk. See if you walk the feels. But you can see, it's like, it's not magic, it sometimes feels like magic, it's really gentle.
It's amazingly gentle.
Yeah.
It's nice.
So I'm curious if walking will feel different for you.
Well, yeah,
Yeah?
absolutely.
Cool.
Usually if I get up, even if I lay down a little bit early,
You look
I'm going right now. Thank you.
awesome. All right. So, any more questions before we stop? And then if anybody's interested, business cards, you can always email me or something. Yeah?
So, do you work with like edema and circulation?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've worked with lymphedema, and yeah, there's a lot of fluid work. Osteopathy is really concerned with fluid work, too. I think the older I get, the more I'm getting interested in lymph, especially. Yeah. Yep. Again, I'd probably give you some home exercises. That's, with certain conditions, especially long-term patterns, you gotta get involved. You have to do your homework. I have to try to come up with your system with the right homework, and then you gotta do it. But yeah, I've had some real success. I have a client who has a genetic condition where cysts grow in her body, and they have just cut huge pieces of her arms and stuff out, and they've totally screwed up the lymph system. And we were able to reroute some of it. And again, I sent her to a lymph drainage specialist. I figured they're better than me. This is their specialty. And they did the protocol. They did what I got when I went to the lymph specialist. It was the protocol. And when I work with her, I'm doing like super gentle, crazy, concentrated listening. And we got far more done. Because I didn't treat her like a Model T Ford coming off the assembly line. Tighten that nut and everything's good. This is not the way people are built. Kathleen?
I just want to say that I've worked with Samuel a lot as a friend and a colleague and received a lot of deep work from him, and I can't recommend him more deeply enough, and I've referred many people to him, so I'm here as kind of a support and friend. And then Samuel, I thought maybe because I know that you also have some other ways that you've woven different modalities and you have some unique perspectives, and I thought maybe you might want to share a little bit about some of what you really offer in your distinct practice.
Well, I don't really want to hold people. I think people are kind of ready to go.
Okay.
I mean, I do shamanic work. That's what came to me. I definitely don't call myself a medium, but I never used to believe kind of in mediums, and once in a while I've had experiences. And I do the energy work that I call oral luminance. That's my own work. Which is, when I studied Reiki, I was like, oh, that's kind of like what I do, but not as much fun. So it's what I was born with. It plays so seamlessly with Ortho-Bionomy that sometimes I don't know which I'm doing. But with oral luminance, I might be pulling structures, energetic structures out of people's fields. And also stuff that some people might consider. I'm not here to change your belief system. I believe in entities and people's spirits and things like that, and I pull that sort of stuff out of people. And if you don't believe in that, that's totally cool. I'm not here to convince everybody. So I have a pretty big range of work. And in Ortho-Bionomy, sometimes I'm not classical. For example, in Ortho-Bionomy, there's a valve here called the ileocecal valve. In class, they teach you how to measure between the hip crest and the pubic bone from the ileocecal valve. I don't have to do that. I know where the ileocecal valve is. I don't know by visually, I know because I can feel it. I can't feel everything in the body, but some things I just feel. So I practice shorthand, which means I'm not always being a classical orthobiologist. In most orthobiology moves, not all, not when I'm linking up the training with the leg, but most moves there's a monitor point. You're monitoring it while you compress. I don't always monitor. Sometimes I monitor energetically because I need both my arms to do what I'm doing. And I can feel what's going on there without touching. So my practice has diverged. In some ways it's classical, in some ways it's not. And it's also just, Ortho-Bionomy is a huge arrow in my quiver, but it's only one of like three. And if I learn more stuff, Ortho-Bionomy is never going to go away, but it's just one tool. It's an incredible tool. It's probably my favorite tool. All right, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.